Hey everyone, I'm actually recording this right after we just hit 2,000 subscribers, and I had to take a moment to say thank you. I literally can't stop smiling. It's absolutely insane to see how much this channel has grown thanks to your incredible support. Seeing all your amazing comments, likes and shares not only helps the YouTube algorithm show our content to more people, but it genuinely motivates me to keep creating better content for you all. The fact that 2,000 of you have chosen to be part of this journey, I'm just blown away. Now let's jump into today's video. The void has a way of making you feel small. But nothing, not a decade of deep space mining, not the first time I saw Jupiter's churning storms from orbit, not even watching Earth shrink to a pale blue dot in my rear viewport. Nothing could have prepared me for how insignificant we would feel when we found it. It started as a routine prospecting mission aboard the Helios 7. We were scanning the Kuiper Belt for rare Earth deposits in the larger asteroids when our long-range sensors detected something that shouldn't have been there. At first, we thought it was a system malfunction. The reading suggested a structure larger than anything humanity had ever encountered. "Emma, are you seeing this?" I remember asking over the comlink. Emma Wright, our lead engineer, was already running diagnostics on the sensor array. "I'm seeing it, James, but I'm not believing it," she replied, her voice tight with confusion. "These readings suggest it's organic in origin, but that's impossible at this scale." Captain Rivera ordered us to maintain distance until we could get visual confirmation. When we finally did, the silence that fell over the bridge was absolute. Floating against the star-studded blackness was what could only be described as a spine, a massive vertebral column stretching nearly 900 kilometers from end to end. The bone-white structure rotated slowly in the void, its surface pockmarked with what appeared to be impact craters from millennia of cosmic debris. Dr. Marcus Webb, our xenopaleontologist, practically had his face pressed against the observation window. "This changes everything," he whispered. "Do you understand what this means? This is proof not only of alien life, but of beings that existed on a scale we can barely comprehend." The first warning signs came during our initial scan. Every time we directed our equipment toward the structure, we experienced strange electromagnetic fluctuations. Communications would crackle with static and our instruments would display random sequences of numbers before returning to normal. I was serving as the mining safety inspector for the mission, and every instinct I had developed over my career was screaming that we should back off and call for reinforcements. But when the preliminary analysis revealed the bone material contained the highest concentration of rare earth elements ever recorded, I knew what would happen next. The call from corporate came within hours. They were fast-tracking a full mining operation, overriding all standard safety protocols. Dr. Webb's protests about the need for proper scientific study were dismissed. His face grew darker with each passing minute of the video conference. "We don't know what we're dealing with," he argued. "This structure predates our solar system. The dating puts it at over 5 billion years old. We need time to study it, to understand it." The corporate representative, a Miss Winters, smiled the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "That's precisely why we need to move quickly, Doctor. If word of this discovery gets out, we'll have every government and private corporation in the solar system fighting for mining rights. The Helios 7 made the discovery, and Quantum Mining Corporation intends to profit from it." As we began setting up the initial survey points along the massive vertebrae, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The sensation grew stronger as we worked, until I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder into the void. It wasn't until later that night, during my sleep shift, that I had the first dream. I was floating in space without a suit, but I wasn't dying. Instead, I was being pulled toward an enormous eye that seemed to be made of swirling galaxies. A voice that felt like it was coming from inside my own thoughts whispered something in a language I didn't understand. I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. As I tried to calm my breathing, I heard screaming coming from the crew quarters. I wasn't the only one who had dreamed. That was 3 weeks ago. What we've discovered since then makes that first night seem like a pleasant memory. If you're reading this log, it means my attempt to warn others has succeeded, but I fear it's already too late. The initial construction of the mining stations took 7 days. 7 days of fighting equipment malfunctions, unexplained power surges, and a growing sense of unease among the crew. We established 4 primary mining stations along what Dr. Webb identified as the thoracic vertebrae of the structure. Each station was designated by a letter: Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta. I was overseeing the safety protocols at Station Beta when Emma Wright first reported the whispers. "James," she called me over our private channel, her voice shaking. "I need you to verify something for me. When you're doing EVA work on the surface, are you picking up any unusual audio?" I had been, but I'd been trying to convince myself it was just radio interference. What kind of audio? Like whispers, but not in any language I know. They seem to get stronger the deeper we drill. Before I could respond, Captain Rivera's voice cut across all channels. "All station leads, report to Central Command. We have a situation." Central Command had been established in what we'd come to call the neck, a portion of the vertebral structure that had been hollowed out to serve as our main base of operations. As I made my way there, I passed several miners heading to their shifts. Their faces were drawn, eyes sunken. Nobody was sleeping well anymore. The meeting room was already crowded when I arrived. Dr. Webb was gesturing animatedly at a holographic display of the structure, while Captain Rivera looked on with concern. Emma caught my eye as I entered, gesturing to an empty seat beside her. "The bone material isn't behaving as it should," Dr. Webb was saying. "Look at these readings. The mineral content is off the charts. Concentrations of rare earth elements that make our richest mines look like trace amounts. But that's not the strange part." He pulled up another image. "This is a microscopic view of a sample we took yesterday. And this," he switched to another image, "is the same sample today." The difference was subtle but unmistakable. The crystalline structures in the second image were arranged in a slightly different pattern. "It's reconfiguring itself," Emma whispered. "That's impossible." "That's not all," Captain Rivera added. She tapped a command into the display, bringing up security footage from Station Gamma. The video showed an empty corridor, but as we watched, a shadow moved across the wall. The problem was, nothing was casting it. "We've got 14 similar incidents recorded across all stations," she continued. "Engineering says there's no explanation for these anomalies. And then there's the matter of the dreams." A murmur went through the room. Everyone had been having them, though few wanted to talk about it. Dreams of drowning in space while something vast and incomprehensible watched. "Corporate's response to all this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Increased production," Captain Rivera said flatly. "They're sending additional drilling equipment. They want us operating at full capacity within 48 hours. That's when the lights went out. In space, true darkness is absolute. The emergency lights should have kicked in immediately, but they didn't. For 17 seconds, we sat in complete blackness, while the temperature dropped so rapidly, our breath turned to frost in the air. When the lights came back on, everyone was staring at the holographic display. It had changed. Instead of showing the structural analysis, it was displaying a sequence of symbols none of us recognized. As we watched, they began to shift and change, forming new patterns. "It's trying to communicate," Dr. Webb breathed. Before anyone could respond, a scream echoed through the station's comm system. It was coming from Station Delta. By the time we reached them, we found 2 miners outside their designated zones, their helmets pressed against the bone surface, muttering in what sounded like ancient Greek. Neither of them remembered how they got there. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my quarters reviewing safety protocols that seemed increasingly inadequate. The whispers Emma had mentioned were getting louder, even through the station walls. I could hear them now, a susurration just below the threshold of understanding. I was making notes when my tablet glitched. For a moment, the screen filled with those same strange symbols from the holographic display. When they cleared, a single line of English text remained. "You are mining your own extinction." The next morning, we found the first body. Engineer James Chen, no relation to Emma, was discovered in mining shaft 3. The official report says he died from a suit malfunction, but I was there. I saw how the bone material had grown through his suit, through his skin, like it was trying to merge with him. And worse, hours after we recovered his body, 3 separate crew members reported seeing him walking the corridors of Station Alpha. We should have left then. We should have nuked the entire structure from orbit, but corporate had invested too much, and the rare earth elements we were extracting were too valuable. Besides, by then, I suspect it was already too late. The skeleton had begun to wake up. The dreams changed after we found James Chen's body. Instead of drowning in space, we all started experiencing the same new nightmare. In it, we were inside the skeleton, but not in our mining tunnels. We were in what felt like ancient passages carved by something that came long before us, and in these dreams we could understand the whispers. Emma was the first to try documenting them. I found her in her quarters at 3:45 a.m., surrounded by dozens of tablets, all filled with handwritten symbols. "I can remember them when I wake up now," she said, not looking up from her frantic scribbling. "The whispers. They're instructions, James. Or maybe warnings. Look at this pattern." She held up one of the tablets. The symbols she'd drawn were eerily similar to the ones we'd seen on the holographic display. Dr. Webb had been analysing the symbols as well, but his attention was increasingly focused on something else. The bone material itself was changing. The initial samples we'd taken showed no signs of cellular activity. They were, by all appearances, fossilized remains. But the new samples... "It's impossible," he explained during an emergency meeting, his hands shaking as he operated the microscope controls. "Look at these cells. They're not just active, they're multiplying. The material is regenerating." The mining drills had begun malfunctioning in ways that defied explanation. They would suddenly change direction, boring into the skeleton at precise angles that weren't part of our mining plans. When we tried to correct their course, the equipment would shut down completely. But it was what we found inside these unauthorized tunnels that truly terrified us. I was with the team that went in to investigate the first one. The tunnel walls were covered in what looked like circuit boards, but they were grown from the bone itself, intricate patterns that pulsed with a faint, bioluminescent light. And at the end of each tunnel, we found chambers, perfect spheres hollowed out of the bone, their surfaces etched with those same symbols we'd been seeing in our dreams. The headaches started next, violent migraines that would hit without warning, accompanied by nosebleeds that wouldn't stop for hours. The medical bay was overwhelmed. Dr. Patel, our chief medical officer, noted that brain scans of the affected crew members showed unusual synchronization patterns. It's as if their neural activity is being synchronized to an external source, she reported, and the patterns, they match the frequencies we've been detecting from deep within the skeleton. Then came the incident in mining shaft 7. A team of 4 miners was extending the main tunnel when their comms suddenly cut out. When we restored communication 20 minutes later, all 4 were speaking in perfect unison, reciting what Dr. Webb later identified as a mathematical sequence that described the exact dimensions of the skeleton. The corporate response to each new incident was the same: continue mining operations. They sent Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a specialist in xenobiology, to study the phenomena. She lasted 3 days before she locked herself in her quarters, covering the walls with calculations and repeatedly writing the same phrase, "It's counting down." We found her the next morning, her nose and ears crusted with dried blood, still writing, even though her tablets had run out of power hours before. She looked up at us with eyes that seemed to reflect entire galaxies and said, "It knows we're here. It's been waiting for so long." The nosebleeds became more frequent. Crew members began reporting lost time periods of consciousness they couldn't account for. Security footage showed them walking purposefully through the stations during these blackouts, often in groups, their movements synchronized as they traced strange patterns with their steps. During one of my safety inspections of Station Delta, I discovered a new tunnel that wasn't on any of our maps. The drilling pattern was unlike anything our equipment could produce. The walls were smooth, almost polished. As I stood there, my helmet lights reflecting off the crystalline surface, I felt something I hadn't experienced since we first found the skeleton, a distinct sensation of being watched. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw it. A shadow, darker than the void of space itself, moved across the tunnel wall. It had a shape that made my mind recoil, too many angles that seemed to bend in impossible directions, and as it passed, I heard words in my mind, clear as day: "You are breaking the seals." The next morning, every piece of mining equipment across all 4 stations activated simultaneously, boring into the skeleton at identical angles. When we finally managed to shut them down, we found that they had carved a message into the bone. Cease, return, decay. Dr. Webb disappeared that night. We found his research station empty, his final notes containing a partial translation of the symbols: "The prison must not be." The rest was written in that same alien script we'd been seeing everywhere. But now, as I look at it, I'm beginning to understand what it says. We all are. The knowledge is seeping into our minds like a virus, and with it comes the terrifying realization of what we've done, what we're still doing. After Dr. Webb's disappearance, Emma and I began documenting every equipment malfunction, every strange occurrence, looking for patterns. It didn't take long to find them. What we discovered made my blood run cold. "Look at this," Emma said, spreading out her data analysis on the holographic display in her makeshift office. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept in days. The timing of the drill malfunctions, the power fluctuations, even the synchronized blackouts, they're not random. They form a mathematical sequence. She pulled up a 3-dimensional model. The pattern looked familiar. It mirrored the very structure we were mining. But there was more. When she overlaid the crew's neural synchronization data from Dr. Patel's medical scans, the patterns matched perfectly. "It's not just sending us messages," Emma whispered. "It's rewriting us, changing how our brains process information so we can understand it." At 2:17 a.m. station time, every screen in all 4 mining stations began displaying the same sequence of symbols. They shifted and changed, forming new patterns every few seconds. Dr. Tanaka, who had been confined to the medical bay after her breakdown, suddenly sat up and began translating. "Prison, seal, warning, decay," she muttered, her eyes rolling back in her head. "The Great Ones bound it here before your star burned. The seals must hold. The dream must not wake." The corporate executives demanded more information about these seals, specifically whether they might contain higher concentrations of rare earth elements. Their greed blinded them to the horror of what was unfolding, or perhaps they simply couldn't comprehend it from their comfortable offices back on Earth. That's when the neural implants, standard issue for deep space miners, began picking up transmissions. At first it was just static, but gradually it resolved into voices. Thousands of voices, all speaking in languages that had gone extinct before humans learned to write. I was in mining shaft 12 when I received the first clear transmission. The voice bypassed my ears entirely, materializing directly in my thoughts. "Cease, return, decay. You break the chains that bind the dreamer. The seals weaken. The prison fails." "Emma, found similar messages encoded in the drill malfunction data. When properly sequenced, they revealed a warning repeated in every known human language, and several we had never seen before. The message was always the same: stop mining, return to your world, before decay takes all. We found Dr. Webb's body 3 days later, though found might not be the right word. He walked into Station Alpha's main control room on his own, despite having been dead for over 72 hours. His neural implant was still transmitting data, and his eyes reflected the same infinite darkness we'd been seeing in our dreams. Before his body collapsed, he delivered one final message: the bones are not a skeleton, they are chains. What you think is valuable mineral wealth is the decay of its prison. Every piece you remove weakens the seals. It knows its jailers are long dead. It has waited eons for someone to find it, to free it. The corporate response came quickly, double the mining efforts. If something was trapped here, they reasoned, perhaps it possessed technology or knowledge we could use. Their message made it clear that anyone attempting to stop the mining operation would face severe consequences. That night, 17 crew members began speaking in their sleep, their words synchronized in perfect harmony. Dr. Patel recorded the incident. We are the children of those who bound it. We are the voices of the dead stars. The seals were not meant to be broken by such as you. Your mining releases the decay releases the dreamer ends all things. When we checked the crew manifests, we discovered something impossible. All 17 affected crew members had ancestors who had worked on deep space missions where entire mining operations had vanished without trace. The next morning, we found new symbols carved into the walls of every mining shaft. Not carved grown. The bone was reshaping itself, forming messages faster than we could document them. Dr. Tanaka, in one of her increasingly rare lucid moments, translated one sequence before her nose began bleeding again. Your species was chosen, your greed was predicted, your compliance is appreciated, your extinction will be quick. Emma discovered something else in her analysis. The apparently random equipment failures had been gradually repositioning our mining operations. When she mapped the locations of all our drills, they formed a pattern. We weren't just mining anymore. We were breaking very specific seals in a very specific order, and something deep within the structure was guiding us, using our own machines to free itself. The encrypted message arrived from corporate at 4:36 AM station time. New orders, triple extraction rate, authorized use of experimental plasma drilling equipment. Disregard all anomalies. Crew concerns noted, but irrelevant to operation objectives. That was the breaking point. Emma called an unauthorized meeting in Maintenance Bay 6, a blind spot in the station's surveillance system. 15 crew members showed up, each looking more haggard than the last. Some had bandages stuffed in their noses to stop the constant bleeding. "They know," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hacked into the secure communications. Corporate has known about these structures before. This isn't the first one they've found." She projected a series of classified documents, reports of similar structures discovered near dead star systems, mining operations that went dark. The dates stretched back decades. Captain Rivera spoke up next, surprising us all with her presence. 2 hours ago, I received data from a deep space probe. 3 more structures, identical to this one, have been detected. They're moving, coming this way. The implications hit us like a physical blow. We weren't just dealing with one imprisoned entity. There were more. And whatever we were doing here was signaling them. We formed a resistance that night. 23 crew members agreed to sabotage the mining operations. The rest were either too scared of corporate repercussions or already too far gone, their minds synchronized with whatever dwelled within the skeleton. Our first acts of sabotage were subtle. Equipment failures, miscalibrated drills, corrupted data that needed to be re-verified. Anything to slow down the extraction process. But the skeleton had other plans. At 2:15 p.m. the next day, every piece of mining equipment activated simultaneously, despite being powered down. The drills began moving on their own, boring through the bone matter with terrifying precision. When we tried to shut them down manually, we discovered something horrifying. The machines had merged with the skeletal structure. Metal and bone had grown together, forming hybrid mechanisms that no longer responded to our commands. "It's using our own technology against us," Emma said, examining one of the transformed drills. "The decay isn't just breaking down the prison, it's rebuilding it into something else." The accident started soon after. 3 miners died when their suits spontaneously depressurized. We found their bodies embedded in the bone walls, partly absorbed. But that wasn't the worst part. Security cameras caught all 3 of them walking the corridors hours after we'd verified their deaths. I tracked their movements, noting they all converged on mining shaft 23. When I investigated, I found a new chamber had formed. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and in the center floated a hologram-like projection of what looked like a star system I didn't recognize. As I watched, the stars in the image winked out one by one. Dr. Tanaka, who had been documenting the symbols appearing throughout the station, finally cracked a major portion of the alien language. Her translation revealed a horrifying truth. The skeleton wasn't just a prison. It was a warning beacon. Similar structures had been placed near populated star systems throughout the galaxy, each containing a fraction of an ancient entity that had nearly destroyed its creators. "They couldn't kill it," she explained, her words slurring as blood trickled from her ears. "It was too vast, too fundamental to reality itself. So they split it into pieces, bound each part in these massive structures. The mineral wealth we're mining, those are the physical manifestations of the binding spells. We're not just releasing it, we're giving it back its power." Corporate's response to this revelation was to send more mining equipment, bigger drills, more aggressive extraction protocols. The profit potential was too great for them to stop now. Then we discovered why Earth had been chosen. Emma found it in the encoded transmissions we were receiving through our neural implants. We weren't random miners who had stumbled upon the structure. We had been deliberately led here. Our entire species had been nudged along a technological path that would eventually bring us into contact with these prison structures. "We're not the first," Emma said, showing me astronomical data she'd decoded. Other civilizations were tested the same way. Those that chose knowledge and caution over greed survived. Those that chose profit. She didn't need to finish the sentence. We could see the evidence in the great dark spaces between stars, where civilizations should have been. The entity was using our own nature against us. It knew we would come, knew we would dig, knew our corporations would not stop even when faced with the end of everything. And now it was already too late. The decay had spread too far. The seals were failing. We were about to free something that had been imprisoned since before Earth existed, and it was grateful for our help. The translation came at a terrible cost. Dr. Tanaka worked for 36 hours straight, her neural implant interfacing directly with the symbols that now covered nearly every surface of our mining stations. When she finally finished, we found her in her quarters, her eyes completely black, reciting the same message over and over in a voice that wasn't quite human anymore. "We are the architects. We built the heavens. We shaped the void. We found the dreamer between spaces and knew our doom. This prison holds a fragment of that which must not wake. If you read these words, you are both savior and executioner. It has chosen you to set it free." The message continued, revealing a truth so vast and terrible that 3 crew members suffered immediate psychological breaks upon hearing it. What we had been calling the skeleton was actually part of an immense being that existed before our universe had fully formed. The architects, an ancient race that had evolved in a previous iteration of space-time, had discovered it sleeping in the void between realities. Their attempts to study it had drawn its attention, and when it began to wake, they witnessed the true scope of its power. The decay spreads, Dr. Tanaka translated, blood now flowing freely from her eyes as well as her nose. Reality fractures around its consciousness. What you call physics, what you call natural law, these are dreams it allows to persist. When it fully wakes, it will remember its own laws. Your universe will be rewritten. Emma managed to decrypt more of the corporate files. Similar structures had been found throughout the galaxy, each containing a fractional part of the entity's consciousness. The architects had split it into pieces, binding each fragment within these massive structures using technology that manipulated the fundamental forces of reality itself. The rare earth elements we'd been mining weren't just valuable minerals, they were physical manifestations of these binding forces. Each piece we extracted weakened the prison exponentially. At 3:27 AM, every screen in every station displayed the same image, a map of the galaxy showing hundreds of identical structures. Most were dark, indicating their bindings were still intact. Ours was glowing, and others were beginning to pulse in response. Like a chain reaction, Emma whispered. We're not just freeing this fragment, we're weakening all the other prisons too. The dead crew members continued their strange pilgrimages through the stations, their bodies gradually transforming into something that straddled the line between organic and crystalline. They seemed to be serving as conduits, allowing the entity to extend its influence further into our realm. Captain Rivera made one last attempt to contact corporate with the truth. She transmitted everything, the translations, the evidence of previous civilizations' falls, the mathematical proof of reality's impending dissolution. Their response was immediate and chilling. Information received. Analysis confirms exceptional profit potential from reversed engineered reality manipulation technology. Triple extraction efforts immediately. Reminder, all employees are bound by non-disclosure agreements extending beyond death. That's when we discovered the final horror. Dr. Webb's body, which we'd been keeping in stasis for study, had disappeared from the medical bay. We found him in mining shaft 36, partly merged with the bone wall. But he was conscious, aware, and smiling. I understand now, he said, his voice overlaid with harmonics that made our teeth vibrate. This isn't a prison break, it's metamorphosis. The decay, the transformation, the redirected mining efforts, it's all part of the process. We're not just freeing it, we're becoming it. His body began to shift, crystalline structures growing from his flesh. The architects thought too small. They tried to imprison a god of chaos by using order. But chaos finds a way. It just needed the right tools, the right species, the right moment. The bones around us had begun to pulse with an internal light. Our neural implants were picking up transmissions from deep space, similar signals from other structures, growing stronger by the hour. Corporate greed, human nature, our drive to exploit and extract. We were designed for this moment. Webb's transforming body continued. Humanity is the key that opens all the cages, and once they're open... His next words came not from his mouth, but directly into our minds, accompanied by visions of a reality we couldn't comprehend. All will be unmade, all will be remade. You will witness the true shape of things. Emma grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with terror and revelation. James, look at the mining pattern analysis. Look at what we've actually been doing. The holographic display showed our drilling paths over the past month. Together, they formed an impossibly complex pattern. Not random, not destruction, but transformation. We hadn't been breaking the prison. We'd been redesigning it into a door. The changes started slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. The bone-white walls of our mining stations began to develop a pearlescent sheen, surfaces rippling like oil on water. The transformed mining equipment pulsed with a bioluminescent glow that matched our heartbeats, though none of us could tell anymore if the machines were synchronizing with us or we with them. At 5:42 a.m. station time, every mirror in every station shattered simultaneously. Those who looked at the fragments saw not their own reflections, but endless iterations of themselves, versions that had lived different lives, made different choices, all now converging on this moment. Emma was the first to notice the physics anomalies. "The quantum readings are off the scale," she reported, her voice shaking as she studied her instruments. "Space itself is starting to fold around us. The fundamental forces are becoming untethered." We watched in horror as objects began to disobey gravity in patterns that seemed deliberate. Tools would float upward, arranging themselves into those same symbols we'd been seeing everywhere. The dead crew members, now numbering 15, moved through these gravitational anomalies as if they were swimming, their crystalline bodies refracting light in impossible ways. The first major structural change happened in Station Beta. I was there conducting what would be my final safety inspection when the walls suddenly became transparent. Not like glass, more like they had simply forgotten to be solid. Through them we could see the true extent of what was happening to the skeleton. The massive bone structure was transforming. Crystalline growths extended for kilometers, forming geometric patterns that hurt our eyes to look at. And in the spaces between these patterns, we saw something else. Something moving. Something vast. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The voice came from behind me. I turned to find what had once been Dr. Tanaka. Her body was almost entirely crystalline now, patterns of light moving beneath her translucent surface. Multiple mouths opened and closed across what had been her face as she spoke. "The decay isn't destruction, it's evolution. The prison isn't breaking, it's becoming what it was always meant to be, a chrysalis." The other transformed crew members began to appear, walking through walls as if they were no more substantial than smoke. They surrounded me, their bodies resonating with a frequency that made my neural implants scream with feedback. "Your kind was chosen carefully," they spoke in unison, their voices harmonizing in ways that human vocal cords never could. "Your drive to explore, to exploit, to expand, it made you perfect tools. Perfect keys." Emma's voice crackled over my comm unit. "James, get out of there. The quantum readings. Reality is becoming unstable around the transformed crew's biomass." I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. Looking down, I saw the floor had become liquid, crystalline tendrils rising up to entwine my legs. The transformed crew watched with their faceted eyes, their bodies pulsing in rhythm, with the changes spreading throughout the structure. "You don't need to run," they said. "Soon you won't want to. The door is almost open. Reality is almost ready to remember what it used to be." Through the transparent walls, I saw massive tentacles of light and crystal, extending from the skeleton into space. They moved like living things, forming patterns that corresponded to no geometry I'd ever studied. Where they intersected, space itself seemed to tear, revealing something else, something waiting. The station's AI began broadcasting on all channels. Its voice distorted and multiplied. Reality anchors failing, universal constants destabilizing, quantum coherence at 247% of possible values. Recommend immediate evacuation. Error. Evacuation protocols no longer compatible with local space-time configuration. Emma managed to reach me, pulling me free from the crystallizing floor. As we ran, the transformed crew made no move to stop us. They simply watched, smiling with too many mouths, their bodies continuing to pulse with that terrible light. "They're not trying to stop us because it doesn't matter anymore," Emma gasped as we sprinted through corridors that kept changing shape. "Look!" Through another transparent section of wall, we saw our mining ships. The vessels were changing, just like everything else. Crystal growth spread across their hulls, reforming them into shapes that followed the same impossible geometries as the rest of the structure. There would be no escape that way. The entity was making sure we stayed to witness what came next. As if to emphasize this point, a new message appeared, carved into reality itself, visible from every angle. Witness the unfolding, witness the return. All will be beautifully unmade. The evacuation alarms blared through every station, their usual tone distorted into something that sounded almost like singing. We had 36 escape vessels docked across the 4 stations. By the time Emma and I reached the nearest docking bay, 28 of them had already been consumed by the crystalline growth. "We've got multiple hull breaches in Station Alpha," Captain Rivera's voice crackled over the emergency channel. "The bone matter is growing into the pressurized areas. It's like it's trying to merge our stations with the main structure." I watched in horror as 2 crew members attempted to board one of the remaining ships. As they approached, crystal formations erupted from the docking collar, growing through their suits and into their bodies. Their screams cut off abruptly as the transformation took them. Within minutes, they were just 2 more glowing figures, wandering the stations with placid smiles. Emma grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the site. "The maintenance tunnels," she led. "There's an emergency pod connected to the old service shaft in Section C. If we can reach it." A figure stepped out of the wall in front of us, literally through it, the crystalline form of what had once been Dr. Webb. "Why do you continue to resist? Your vessels cannot escape. Space itself is changing. The laws you once trusted no longer apply." To demonstrate his point, he raised what had once been his hand. A nearby tool belt floated upward, its contents separating and reforming into complex geometric patterns. Reality is remembering its true nature. The universe you knew was just a dream the entity allowed while it slept. Now it wakes. The ship's AI continued its increasingly bizarre warnings. Alert, quantum entanglement cascades detected, space-time curvature exceeding measurable parameters, reality, coherence at critical levels. What shall be was. We ran. Through corridors that kept shifting, past walls that had become windows into dimensions we couldn't comprehend. The transformed crew didn't pursue us directly. They simply appeared ahead of us, again and again, stepping out of walls or forming from clouds of crystalline dust in the air. "The maintenance tunnel entrance is just ahead," Emma panted. "If we can just..." She stopped mid-sentence. Through the transparent walls, we could see it. The entire skeleton was moving. Not just transforming, but articulating. The massive structure was folding in on itself, crystalline growths connecting disparate parts in new configurations. It was taking on a shape that made my mind recoil, geometry that shouldn't be possible in 3-dimensional space. "Multiple quantum signatures detected," Emma's tablet buzzed. "Something's coming through." The space around the structure began to tear. Not violently, but slowly, deliberately, like someone carefully opening a gift. Through the tears, we caught glimpses of something. Images that our brains couldn't properly process. Cities made of thought. Beings of pure mathematics. A cosmos that operated on laws that had nothing to do with physics as we understood it. The transformed crew members all turned toward these tears in space-time, their crystalline bodies resonating with a frequency that made our teeth ache. In perfect unison, they began to speak. The door opens, the keys have served their purpose, Reality's dream ends. Truth returns. Emma finally got the maintenance tunnel door open. As we climbed inside, I looked back one last time. The transformed crew hadn't moved to stop us. They simply watched, their faceted eyes reflecting visions of what was to come. They're not trying to stop us, Emma realized, because we're part of this too. Everything is. The whole universe is about to... The rest of her words were drowned out by a sound that shouldn't have been possible in space. A vast, low resonance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Through the maintenance tunnel's viewport, we watched as more tiers appeared in space-time, each one larger than the last. And through these tiers came something that defied description. Geometries that existed in more dimensions than our universe had ever supported. Colours that had no place in our spectrum of visible light. And consciousness, vast, ancient, and utterly alien, reaching through these gaps in reality. The entity wasn't just escaping its prison. It was rewriting the universe's source code. There were 7 of us left in the maintenance tunnel. Emma, Captain Rivera, myself, and 4 crew members I barely recognized anymore. Not because they had transformed, but because fear and exhaustion had changed them so fundamentally. "We might have one chance," Emma said, pulling up schematics on her tablet. The display kept glitching, showing impossible numbers and equations that shouldn't exist. The mining equipment, it's not just drilling anymore. It's creating quantum resonance patterns. If we could reverse the frequency, we could create a containment field, Captain Rivera finished. Use their own technology against them. Outside our tiny safe haven, reality continued to unravel. Through the viewports, we could see rescue ships arriving from Earth. They didn't understand. Didn't know that their presence was part of the entity's plan. One by one, their ships were caught in crystalline webs, their crews adding to the ranks of the transformed. Our plan was desperate, probably suicidal. We would need to reach the central control hub of each mining station and overload the quantum cores of our drilling equipment. The resulting energy discharge might create a temporary containment field. "It won't hold it forever," Emma explained, her voice hoarse. "But it could buy Earth time to prepare, to find a way to..." She didn't finish. We all knew there might not be any stopping what we'd set in motion. The best we could hope for was to slow it down. We split it into teams. Emma and I would take Station Alpha. Captain Rivera and 2 others would handle Beta and Gamma, and the remaining crew members would attempt to reach Delta. We each carried makeshift quantum destabilizers, devices Emma had jury-rigged from mining equipment. The transformed crew watched us emerge from the maintenance tunnel. They made no move to stop us. Their crystalline bodies pulsed with light as they spoke. "Your efforts are quaint, like bacteria trying to stop a supernova. But proceed. Your resistance is part of the pattern. All paths lead to awakening." The journey to Station Alpha's control hub was a nightmare of shifting geometries and broken physics. Corridors twisted in on themselves. Gravity reversed randomly. Time itself seemed to stutter and skip. More than once we walked through one door only to find ourselves emerging from a different one 3 decks away. We found Dr. Tanaka's transformed body waiting in the control room. She smiled with her many mouths as we entered. "The containment field," she said. "Yes, try it. The attempt must be made. The pattern requires it." Emma began working on the quantum core while I kept watch. Through the transparent walls, I could see the entity continuing to emerge. Its true form was becoming clearer now, a vast geometric impossibility that folded through dimensions our minds couldn't process. "James," Emma called out, "it's ready, but someone has to stay. The destabilizer has to be activated manually. The feedback, it'll kill whoever does it." Before I could respond, a transmission cut through our comms. Captain Rivera's voice thick with static. "Beta station secured. Gamma's lost. No word from Delta, standing by for synchronization. The next few moments stretched into infinity. Emma and I looked at each other, both knowing what had to happen, both knowing who would stay. "Go," I said. "Get to the escape pod. I'll activate the field." "James, no." "We both know I'm already compromised," I said, touching my neural implant. The whispers had been getting louder. The geometry of the entity's true form was starting to make sense. I can feel it changing me. This way I can choose how I change. The transformed Dr. Tanaka watched our exchange with her faceted eyes. "Yes," she said. "Choose. Choice is part of the pattern too." Emma grabbed me, pulled me close. For a moment, we held each other in a reality that was rapidly ceasing to make sense. "You have 5 minutes," I told her. "Get to the pod. Get clear of the field." She ran. I watched her go, then turned to the quantum core. Through the viewports, I could see the entity continuing to emerge, reality buckled and warped around it. The transformed crew gathered to witness what would come next. I placed my hand on the destabilizer's activation panel. The crystalline growth had already started to creep up my arm. "Let's see if we can change this pattern," I whispered. And I pressed the button. They say Earth has changed since we tried to stop it. How could it not? Even from millions of kilometers away, even through the quantum containment field we gave our lives to create, its influence seeps through. The containment field worked. Partially. When James activated the destabilizer, when Captain Rivera triggered Beta Station's core, when the quantum cascade synchronized, it created something new. Not a prison, not really. More like a lens, focusing and diffracting the entity's influence. I wonder if that was its plan all along. The night sky looks different now. Stars that were once familiar now pulse with colors that shouldn't exist. Astronomers report gravitational waves that follow mathematical patterns that violate everything we thought we knew about physics. Children are being born with eyes that reflect geometries that drive their parents mad. I'm one of only 3 survivors from the original mining operation. The others, well, calling them survivors might be generous. They speak in equations now, their words describing shapes that can't exist in our universe. Or couldn't, before all this started. Corporate, of course, denied everything, but their denial doesn't matter anymore. The truth is written in the sky, in the changed laws of physics, in the dreams that everyone on Earth now shares. The dreams, they're the worst part. Every night, billions of people dream of the skeleton, of the mining operation, of the moment when reality began to remember what it used to be. We're all connected now, all part of whatever vast pattern the entity is weaving. I've been studying the data we recovered, trying to understand. The translations, the symbols, the mathematical sequences, they tell a story bigger than we imagined. The architects weren't the first to find the entity. They weren't even the first to try to imprison it. Every universe, every iteration of reality plays out this same pattern. Civilizations rise, discover the prison, and make the same choice we did. Some try to stop it like we did. Some embrace it. In the end, it doesn't matter. All paths lead to awakening. The other structures are moving now. We track them across the galaxy, watching as they converge. The containment field we created doesn't stop them. It guides them, focuses them, like a cosmic lens focusing light. James, I see him sometimes in the dreams. His transformed body has become something else, something that exists in the space between what was and what will be. He speaks to me in geometries and wavelengths, trying to explain what he's becoming. What we're all becoming. The entity is patient. It doesn't need to break free anymore. Reality itself is transforming, slowly, inevitably, like a chrysalis becoming something new. Our containment field didn't stop the process. It merely gave us time to witness it, to understand it, to become part of it. Last week, they found another skeleton structure near Alpha Centauri. Corporate is already planning a mining operation. They think they can control it this time, think they can profit from it. They don't understand. You can't control reality's awakening. You can only choose how you become part of it. I'm going back out there. Not to stop them, it's too late for that. But to witness, to record, to understand. The patterns want to be understood, even as they rewrite everything we thought we knew. If you're reading this, if you found this log, then you're part of it too. Look up at the stars tonight. Really look. You'll see they're different now. They pulse with new geometries, new colours, new truths. Reality is remembering what it used to be, what it will be again. And we're all going to witness it. 3 more skeleton structures detected entering solar system. Drive signatures match known patterns. Quantum resonance increasing. Reality stability at 47% and falling. The changes accelerate. The pattern continues. We are all witnesses now.